Hello, everybody. We're back every day at 11, the networking show. Today, I have a special guest that texting right now. She will be on in a few seconds. Um, yeah. So I guess in the beginning, let's talk about some things I've seen in the last few days, technology, entrepreneurship wise, that I think people should know. So I've been on a bunch of calls about a bunch of things, and one thing I've been noticing is people are getting more and more comfortable with this remote work thing. I think people are being super innovative about how they're running their organizations during this time, and I hope they continue to think this way once this is over, because I believe people are becoming much more efficient. I think travel is such a waste of time that humanity is just like throwing in the garbage every day for old school methods of having to feel like you have to be somewhere to be productive. I think there's definitely, good reasons to be places certain times, but definitely think we don't need to be traveling as much as we did before this. So I got my guest here, Amanda Septimo. Hi, Amanda.
Hey, how are you?
Good, good, good. My voice, I'm losing my voice because I'm doing too many things.
Shows.
Yeah,
Too
yeah,
many
yeah.
shows. Too many kids, too many shows.
Too many, yeah, too many, exactly. Thousand, all of that. So the way my show works is I start off by talking about how I met the person on the show, and then I let them get into what they do, and
Okay.
then we go from there.
Cool.
So the way I met Amanda Septimo was I was in the banknote building one day, and Amanda came by with a woman named Maria Gotch, right? Right,
Yep.
Gotch? Yes,
Yep.
yes, yes. I should know that name. And you should look her up. She was part of the partnership for NYC,
Yep.
right? That's what it was. And we were in the banknote building. We had office space there, and we were working as entrepreneurs, a bunch of companies. And Amanda came by to give Maria Gotch a tour of our incubator. It was called at the time. It was really a shared office space. So I met Amanda. She did the tour, and when I was showing what I did, I showed her augmented reality. And Amanda was like, "Wow, that's pretty crazy. What am I looking at here?" And I remember that. And then Maria Gotch left, and then Amanda was literally working a few floors above the incubator. She was working for Congressman Serrano, so she brought Maria Gotch around New York. I mean, around the Bronx to show her the initiatives that were working in the Bronx.
Yep.
So Amanda was really my introduction to politics. Like once we got cool, anytime I had a political question, I'll be like, Amanda, what should I do here? I don't even understand what's going on. so
I'm not sure I'm the expert either. Like we'll see in
yeah.
a few years if that was right.
You're my expert. So over time, she would bring us into different initiatives, trying to bring more technology to the Bronx and New York City through her work with Congressman Serrano. And then eventually, she went on to run herself for different things. And I'll let you get into what you're doing now. But talk about your background, and then we'll talk about what you're doing now.
Yeah. So first, thanks for having me on. I'm super excited about this.
Thank you for coming
I'm
on. You're
gonna
my
put my
first politician on.
Oh, I'll take it. I'll take it. Oh, I really like to think I'm just a normal person who does politics. So you can have another politician on and call them a politician. Um,
Okay, 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 good.
I my background. I'm born and raised in the South Bronx. I started in this kind of realm of like change and equity and justice when I was a teenager, actually working at the Point CDC in their teen activist program called Action, which stands for Activists Coming to Inform Our Neighborhood, which I think is an incredible program because it really shows young people how to value their own voice and
Wait, before you move on that, I want you to tell the story about the jails, what you did when you were like 8 years old.
feels feels like that long ago, by the way. Okay, yes. So when I was at the Point, that is okay. During my time in the Point, it was 2008 ish, I think. No, it was 2006, 2005, and 2006. Bloomberg was the mayor in New York City. It was a crazy time. Anybody who remembers Bloomberg, if he wanted something to happen, it happened, right? And that's the benefit of like not only being the mayor, but having a few $1 billion in your pocket as well, right? Yeah. So Bloomberg wanted to be a mayor for extra 4 years, happened. Bloomberg wanted to, co-locate schools, happened. Everything that he wanted to see happened. And so in that time, he's popular, he's powerful, he's rich. He decided that he wanted to build a new jail in Hunts Point, and Hunts Point is where I'm from. And Hunts Point at the time had 7 jails open, 7 different incarceration facilities, right? Like some for kids, Spofford, we had the boat, but they are all altogether 7. And the community was like, crime's going down. You don't need to build a $375 million jail with 2,000 beds, because we know that when jails get built, they get filled, right? Beds get built, they're going to get filled. And so you feed this mass incarceration.
That's a good t-shirt.
Well, anybody who does this work knows it's true, right?
It's 100%.
And so, and you don't even have to do this work. You know that like jails are not going to sit empty, right? The prison industrial complex is a real thing. If they build it out, they're going to get people.
Especially in the Bronx, right? Like, all right, let's find.
Exactly. And, from a community perspective, it was like, A, we're already overburdened, but B, we need meaningful investments in our community that are not connected to things that feel toxic. Like we also have a lot of waste management in the South Bronx. So we deal with a lot of people's trash and their sewage and all these things that are like, why is our community dealing with all the bad shit? Right. And I'm not going to curse anymore.
No, you can't. I curse all the
time. So the community was just like, you know what? We're going to fight this. Right. And we fought and we fought and we fought and we fought and we fought. And it was a long, long, long fight. And we rallied and we wrote letters and we had a hearing in the Bronx where we kept the commissioner there, commissioner of corrections at the time. His name was, I forget his first name. I think it was Martin Horn was his last name. And we kept him there till 11:30 p.m. The hearing started at 5 p.m. We kept him there till 11:30 p.m. because that's how many community members we had lining up to speak and speak and speak on the record saying, we don't want this. So before we are heading into this, we had rallied and done everything we were going to do. And it was the night before that hearing, actually. And I was working on like perfecting my little remarks that we had been working on as teenagers in the action program. And I said to the person who runs the program, I was like, I feel like we've been in newspapers, we've been in rallies, we've done all these things. I feel like we're going to beat this. And she just kind of looked at me and didn't really say anything, but I could see that she was like kind of conflicted. And I was like, do you not think we're going to beat this? And I kind of, it's amazing because I can remember watching her face decide whether she was going to tell me the truth or not, right? Like whether she was going to be honest or not. Yeah. And she kind of thought about it and she was just like, no, I don't think we're going to beat this. And she was like, but sometimes it's about the fight. Sometimes it's just about the fight and making sure that, your community is heard. And so I was 16. I was devastated in that moment, right? Because you can imagine you
work all that.
Like the biggest thing in my life, right? Thing happening for me. And so I was just like, well, what do you mean? And we'd done everything, right? So I was just like, what? So right in that moment, I scrapped my remarks. And I started over because I decided the first version that I had was way too polite. And I came up with
now you know you got no shot. You might as well go hard.
Like, no. Then I'm going to really tell you what I think if you're really not even, So I scrapped my remarks. The next day we have that hearing where we were there till 11:30 p.m. And you can imagine me telling my parents, like, I promise I'm out doing important work, I promise. It's 11:30, I know, but I'm doing important work. But my parents are actually incredibly supportive and understanding. And so hearing happens, a couple weeks pass and we didn't hear anything. And then another couple of weeks pass and we hear that the cost of the jail has gone from 375 million to like 425 million. And we were like, damn, not a good sign, right? If people
they're investing more.
Exactly. Like if you're still looking at how much things cost, then that probably means you're still looking to build. And it was discouraging. And okay, keep going. Another few weeks pass. You know what happened? We never heard anything about the jail again.
Nice.
Never built.
Went away. It just went
Yeah.
away.
Never spoken of again. Just completely disappeared. And I tell people often that like it was when I was 16, but it still ranks in like one of my top 3 proudest moments in my life because, and it wasn't just me, clearly, like I was not the
Sure.
central piece of it, but it really felt like, I will say it really felt like an effort where like we all were an important part of that effort. And it, to me, is the best example that I've seen in my life of a community that is counted out and that is hella against all odds, right? Like we were in a
Yep.
David and Goliath fight there
Yep.
and should not have won that, and waged the fight of our lives anyway, and we're able to win that. And it's incredibly like heartwarming for me that we were able to make that happen, but it's also shitty that like now I'm gonna stop cursing that now, you know,
Better get ready because
and I'm so calm, right? I'm so relaxed.
yeah.
It's terrible to me that, you know, however many years, I'm 29 now, so 13 years later, we're having another fight about another jail, but this time in Mont Haven, and
Oh,
which is
yep.
right down the road, right? And it's the same kinds of issues where it's like we have to think about equity in a global sense, not just, okay, well, this square, these few blocks don't have anything bad, so we can stick it here, right? Like when we're talking about New York as a city and as a state, we have to look at what equity looks like all across the board. And there's some places, there's a lot of places in this city, like the Upper East Side, like parts of Brooklyn, like downtown.
It's not even an option.
They don't have a waste transportation or a jail or this or that. And so the fact that we're constantly having to choose, right? And in the case of this new jail that's coming to Mott Haven, it's been shopped with all these other benefits. Like, oh, well, it's going to come with all these community programs. That's great. Those community programs should be here anyway. We shouldn't have to jail.
We got to take a jail to get the good stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, no, that's not how this goes. And that's not how we should have to be made to barter, because that's not how a lot of other parts of just New York City function, right? And it's not how things should work. And so I'm all about closing records. I do think that it's something that needs to happen, but I don't think that you can just trample over communities that have these really long, complicated histories with these issues, and complicated histories and powerful histories around activism, and act like they never happened, you know?
So that story, I remember, like just like many politicians, after meeting you, I got more into politics, right? And I've been around the speeches, and when you told that story, I was like, that story's crazy. Everybody should know that. That was awesome. And the point of the story was sometimes it's just about the fight. That even I was like, all right, that makes sense, you know. And another thing that you bring up, which always pisses me off, is I always tell people jails are a certain kind of incubator, right? I have many family members that went to jail because, like you said, the jails were there and they needed to be filled. And in the 80s, they filled them with our people. And they all told me I had no idea how to do real crime until I went to jail. Like, you know, and they'll build those type of accelerator programs, but they won't put in the type of programs that will help people actually change their lives and change their communities. They'll spend $425 million on that, but they won't give an accelerator program like $1,000, you know?
Fraction of that. Exactly. And not only like our schools, when you talk about accelerator programs, economic development programs, job training programs, right? And not jobs that are going to leave you still having to collect public assistance because you can't feed your family, right, on one job. And there's so many other ways. And then you also think about like schools and like school to prison pipeline, right? Even the fact that like the private prison industry exists says all that is true about our incarceration system, right? That like you are allowed to make money off of this concept where we're in theory righting people's wrongs to society, but
only certain people, right? Because certain people do as much crime as others, but they don't go to jail.
Right. Exactly.
So this is pretty crazy.
Exactly. That's definitely a real thing, and I think it's something that's really frustrating for me. But yeah, so that's definitely happened when I was 16. So hopefully it doesn't mean too early, right? Hopefully
no. I think it's just your start. It's your start.
I hope so. But I will say that moment of like sometimes it's just about to fight is something that really stays with me, because I'm no stranger to picking big fights, you know, and you have to, I think, somewhere inside be okay with the idea that like maybe this won't work out, right? But it's worth waging this war anyway. And maybe this won't get me all the way where I'm trying to go, but it's worth having this fight anyway, so that I'm heard, and that communities are heard.
100%. And that was one of the first times I really started to more understand politics. Like I said, being around you and being asked by the congressman's office to like give my insights about what I believe technology needed to happen in the Bronx was where I started to understand, okay, the connection of business and politics, right? Like I never really cared about politics growing up in the Bronx at all. And we used to have these conversations. Like I really believe it was kept away from me.
For sure.
The information was kept away from me. And I remember the first time you ran, I told you that. And I was like, we should create an app that allows people to ask you questions directly. And I pitched this to many politicians. You were the first to say, let's do it. And you did it. And I believe it's the start of how things have to work. We have to feel connected to the politician and understand what they're here for and what benefits us.
Yeah.
And then we'll be more interested.
Accountable to you too, right? Like you are completely entitled to ask questions and to say, hey, what is it that you're working on? Hey, this is an issue that I think is important. What do you think about it? Are you doing anything about it? Right? And then make those decisions when you're voting, right? Think about how those issues get addressed or they don't, and then vote accordingly. And I think you're right that a lot of this information, a lot of our politicians hide.
Yes.
Like they hide because it's easier to deal it's not easy, right? To represent a district of 150,000 people in Congress. It's about 1 million people each, right? So it's not easy. That's a lot of competing interests. It's a lot of different opinions, a lot of different thoughts, a lot of different issues. So a lot of our politicians take the easier way out and hide because they'll rely on low voter turnout. They rely on, okay, I know it's this group of people that's going to turn out to vote, so let me make sure I'm engaged with this group of people. One of the things that a lot of people don't know is that there's this program called it's NGP Van, Voter Action Network, which is a platform that the Democrats have, that when you're running for office, you can pay money to access this data, and it shows you, I can type in your name, Miguel, and it'll tell me where you live, your birthday, all that stuff, but it also tells me all the times you voted.
Oh, wow.
Forever. And it even shows me when you registered. And so I use that information.
It's public information? Anybody can see it?
No, you have to pay into it.
Oh, okay.
And you have to kind of be approved to use it. Like you've got to be a Democrat, you've got to be right here, because you don't want people abusing the information for like Republicans, right? But there's all of this really targeted information about you and your voting history specifically. And that is something that a lot of campaigns use to analyze voter behavior and predict whether you're going to come out and vote in the next election or not. And that really shapes how campaigns decide to talk to people or not. It's like, okay, well, Miguel hasn't voted in 10 years, so he's not going to vote in this election. I'm not going to bother knocking on his door.
Don't even bother. Yep.
And that matters, right? Like that matters because that's another person that you're just not bothering to reach out to. And so one of the things that we did last cycle, and we want to do more of this cycle, is like reaching out to those people who haven't voted in 10 years to say, hey,
what happened? Yeah.
Hey, and I can't tell you, I knocked last cycle in 2018, and I know we'll like get into that, but I knocked on almost 4,000 doors myself. And I cannot tell you how many times someone opened the door and said, whoa, that's you on the flyer? So surprised.
They can see the politics.
Exactly. Me coming to say, hi, I'm introducing myself. We're neighbors. Let's talk about what's going on and what we can fix, And that is something that, like, if you live in Iowa, you get tired. You get tired of politicians knocking on your door, right? And they're presidential candidates too, right? Like, it's not just and you get tired of seeing them. But in places like the Bronx, never.
You even know they exist. Exactly.
You can be represented by the same person for 30 years and you never met them.
Exactly. So, all right, let's fast forward. So you were 16 and you got a jail out of the Bronx. Then let's fast forward to like 21-ish, I guess. Yes. You became the youngest.
23, actually. So I went to college, came back, and I took an opening. So in that time when I was in high school, I was also interning at Congressman Serrano's office. And so when I came back from college, there was an opening at the office, and I took it, and I joined their community liaison team, which basically just like outreach team, right? And reaching out to the community was like my job. And about a year and 4 months into that, I got promoted and became the district director, which at the time made me like one of the youngest senior staffers in Congress, which I'm really proud of. I was 23, and it was a crazy leap and learning experience. And I'm super grateful to Congressman Serrano for the opportunity, because I think that one of the things that happens a lot in the South Bronx is that we have a lot of people with a lot of talent, but who don't always get the opportunity for their talent to rise to meet the occasion. Yep. And that was really a time where it was like, show me what you got. And it allowed me to grow professionally, but also really deepen my understanding of like what it means to marry policy and politics and examine those failures on the ground and work to kind of bridge those gaps. And I was 23, right? So I was living a crazy life where like I was very serious in the daytime, but I was still very free on weekends. And so it's this incredible balance that was really exciting, and really crazy. And I'm grateful for that opportunity.
No, that's another awesome story. So okay, fast forward now. I guess if you want to talk about how you got to what you're about to do now. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was at the congressman's office total for 4 years, and then I went to work for a labor union, the labor union that represents principals and assistant principals in public schools. And then I decided to run for state assembly. And in there, it was, I took on an incumbent who has been there. I'm 29. She's been there now for 26 years. So my whole life, basically, right? And which is like honestly still hard for me to like really wrap my head around. Like, I was 3 when we got there. Like, how does that even happen? But whatever. So it was a really tough race in 2018. This seat is up every 2 years. So every 2 years there's an election for it. It was a really, really, really long and hard fought race.
And most time people don't even go after it, right? Because it's like incumbent. If you don't know, I didn't know. Incumbent means people who are already in office, they just don't get,
Yes. And a lot of people don't challenge people who are already in office because they have a lot of advantages already being in office.
Oh, yeah, right? So stacked. Once I started understanding when you were running how stacked it is for them. The incumbents are just like kings.
Yeah. How could you ever win? Yeah. But sometimes about the fight, right?
Sometimes, yeah.
And so I decided, because honestly, I tell people that like my days at the point really, because I was so young, it really shaped like how I view the world. And it makes it so that I think I view everything with like a lens of equity. And like, if there were true equity in this situation, what would it look like? And 9 times out of 10, that does not match what's actually happening, right? If you look at any city program, it's like, okay, if this were truly equitable, what would this look like? And it's never
at all,
right?
Not even close.
It's never reality. Exactly. Yeah. And I just live in a community where we're always on the short end of it, right? And in all of my years working in government and politics, I had constantly run into the feeling of like, okay, well, if this were me, I would have spoken up a little more about that issue. If this were my decision, we would fight harder on this. And you have that thought over and over and over and over again, and you finally just decide like, I'm going to do it, because I need people who are going to speak up as much as I think somebody needs to be speaking up about that, right? And we have structural issues, right? Like, we have the worst air quality in the country. We've had that forever.
And now something like Corona really starting to be the reason a lot of people are dying.
Exactly. And we've been the poorest for as long as I've been alive. We've all of the worst of the worst. We have crisis after crisis after crisis. And at the end of the day, we have to just get real about the fact that like that means we have a leadership crisis, right? Like that means that we don't have policies that are working on the ground. And it's somebody's job to do that. There's a lot of people's job who it is to do that, right? And it certainly starts with our elected leadership. And I was like, you know what? Let's do it. And one hell of a fight, right? Like David and Goliath times million, right? And when someone's been in office, honestly, for as long as you've been alive, people know their name, for better or worse. Know their name. And people vote. Voting habits say that like
branding is branding. They just know the name.
Exactly. They know the name. They've heard it somewhere. They've maybe seen it, and they'll mark it. And that's a really, really, really hard thing to fight against. And to try to build that kind of name recognition is really, really, really difficult. And I'm not knocking anybody who's in public service. I'm certainly not knocking my opponent. It's not easy. It's not glamorous. But I do think that there is a certain responsibility to say, like, listen, I just can't carry the ball forward anymore. And you have to know when to pass it on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we are certainly at that point where, like, if we don't start thinking about what tomorrow looks like in terms of policy in the Bronx, we're going to be as unrecognizable as Brooklyn in 5 minutes, you know?
Yes. If not, it's already happening.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's
No,
already
exactly.
happening.
We have
So,
empty plots of land selling for $150 million. And it's like, that's not
yeah,
for people here.
exactly. And the luxury apartments are going up over and over. So, all right. So now let's get to what are you doing right now?
So right now, I am running again. So 2018 didn't work out. We got just under 40% of the vote, which was devastating.
Mm-hmm.
But learned a hell of a lot of lessons. And I honestly, I hate that phrase, like, oh, you learn a lot of lessons the first time you take. I hate that concept, but I gotta own that it's 100%
That's
true.
how it works. Every
Totally.
entrepreneur watching understands.
Exactly. It's just like, yeah, no, okay. I can't even front. I hate it. I didn't want to learn that way, but it's 100% true.
It's the only way to learn most times.
You said what?
It's the only way to learn most times.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so learned a lot of lessons, took them all sharper, more focused, and understanding more this time around. And so waging the same fight against the same incumbent. And I've got to tell you, I feel good in that even though we weren't able to pull out the win, there is something so incredibly powerful about having thousands of conversations with people who agree that we need change, right? Like people
Sure.
the same thing that I see, because it's easy to feel crazy, right? And I'm sure other entrepreneurs feel this, where it's like, yo, am I forcing this, or is this real, or
Yeah,
right?
imposter syndrome, all that stuff,
Exactly.
right? Like
Exactly. And it's like, you need that confirmation from other people sometimes, right? Like, it's like, no, I am onto something. Like, this is real. There's other people who feel this, and we do deserve change. And I think there's something so powerful about returning that sense of power to people, right? Like, because I think in the Bronx, one of the things that happens is, like, we start to feel numb, where we get so used to things being so bad that it's just kind of accepted and standard, you know?
100%. And that's where I really thought your platform, the way you were doing it the first time, and I'm sure you're doing it the same way, is you were trying to figure out how to get people educated in why they need to be involved, right? Like right now, what are you running right now on? Like, talk to the people about because most people are not. I don't think most people are as entrepreneurial as you are too that run, right? Like, Amanda's always calling me with an idea for a business. She's very business minded, and I think in politics that's not always the case. Like,
I'm gonna. By the way, a couple of those ideas are gonna come to fruition. I promise. I'm just trying to get this campaign thing done.
Yeah. We'll have you back on the show when you launch whatever it is.
Exactly. One project at a time. One project. At a time. I think so. I think it is the conversation with people. It's really like, it's kind of like if you imagine like people kind of like ice and get so like iced into these habits where you then become numb, where it's like, okay, yes, there's always trash everywhere. That's normal. But you go to Times Square, there's not trash everywhere. That's not a normal thing.
Sure.
Oh, fun fact. This is a mind-blowing fact to me. One, the busiest subway kind of turnstile station the busiest subway station in New York City is Times Square, right? Predictably.
Yep.
The second busiest subway station in the entire 5 boroughs is 3rd Avenue, 149th Street.
What? How is that the case? Wow. See, that's another thing. Amanda always has these amazing stats that I'm like, no. What?
But I think I love amazing stats, because I think that they really draw into perspective how, for whatever reason, politics and policy have allowed us to think of outer boroughs and places like the Bronx and communities like the South Bronx specifically as less important and contributing less to the city, and so deserving less of focus, attention, resources, right? But that's one of those facts that drives home that, like, no, we are at the center of this with everyone.
That's crazy. And it's only going to get worse because 149th is getting like a whole revitalization. And that would be would that be your district if you won?
In the heart of our district, yes.
All right.
In the heart of it. And but 149 doesn't get the same services that Times Square does. Times Square gets garbage picked up 5 times a day.
149th looks like Times Square did 20 years ago.
And there's like now the bid is there and working to do something.
Now it's getting better.
Revitalize it, but the bottom line is that, like, why are we having to fight for things that are basic and standard in other places? It's ridiculous, right? When you look at the trash in NYCHA, crazy, right? NYCHA rat problems are out of this world because of the trash issues.
So that's another thing. Like, why don't you touch on that story? I went with you. I remember when it was freezing, and so talk about that.
Yeah. So every year, so we have in Mount Haven is part of the district. The district that I'm running in includes Hunts Point, Mount Haven, Port Morris, parts of High Bridge, the Yankee Stadium area, and parts of the Grand Concourse, like north of there. And Mount Haven has the highest concentration of not affordable housing, of NYCHA, public housing, I think, in the city. So if you're in Mount Haven, 3 in 4 people you meet on the street will live in the projects. So that's like a really high number of people, right? It's a lot of people. And another crazy
stat.
Sorry?
Another crazy stat.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
I'm good for it. So one of the projects there is Patterson Houses, and Patterson Houses is always on the news because of their heat issues, their boiler issues, right? It's been 10 years, literally, that Patterson has needed new boilers and been promised them. And boilers, for just like basic, right? Like boilers control your heat. They also contribute to like pressure, water pressure, which so heat and water is what heats your apartments, right? And
heats your water. Like, imagine having to take a cold shower and fucking freezing.
Or the boiler breaks down and the water pump breaks, so there's no water. That's happened too, right? So years and years and years, Patterson has been fighting for heat. Every winter, there's no heat. So a couple years back, we were heading into, I don't think I was at the Congressman's office anymore. I really can't remember. My life is just one big blur, honestly, at this point. Especially
too much.
But I don't believe I was at the Congressman's office anymore. But Patterson didn't have heat. We were heading into the coldest weekend of the year. It's always like in November, right? It's always that first really cold weekend of winter. It's toward the end of November, just before Thanksgiving usually. And we had been shaming NYCHA in all the ways that we could privately, but it just wasn't making a difference. People are putting in their tickets. They were getting closed. People were doing all kinds of things and nothing. So we were just like, you know what? Let's put together a press conference. Let's do it. Get residents outside the rent office because they pay rent. There are people think that housing, people pay cheap rent. There's people that pay $2,000 to live in the projects.
What?
It's not this like cheap, free ride that people like fashion it as and say like, oh, you're paying cheap rent, so you should live in bad conditions. But B, it's also just not true. So we decided, let's have a little something right in front of the rent office where people always have to go, because NYCHA will be late on their heat and this will break and this will happen, but you can't be late on your rent because you will get thrown out, right? And so we wanted to really draw into focus that point. So we got a bunch of residents together, invited news cameras and said, hey, this is unacceptable. And NYCHA started working on it, and then the next week we have a lot of politicians having the same conversation.
I did notice that.
Right? It's like, okay, well, but at the end of the day, like, who cares? As long as you are here now bringing attention to this issue that needs attention, great. You should have done it before. You shouldn't have to be it. You shouldn't have to be embarrassed by somebody who got to it before you. But as long as you're doing it, no problem. Made it to like pretty major news networks, etc. Fine. NYCHA then brings in some like janky temporary boilers that get parked outside that contribute to air quality issues in a place that already has worse air quality, right? And that was the state of that for a while. That year, the assembly decided to put aside money for
boilers,
right?
Nice.
And the assembly had to decide how to divvy up that money. Do you know how much money got to Patterson?
How much? For real?
$0.
Oh,
you know why?
My God. Why?
Because your state reps are the ones who have to speak up and say, hey, if there's money, it was a pot of like $300 million and they were dividing it up in the city, right? Which, by the way, not enough, but okay, fine. $300 million we found. NYCHA needs like $18
But in
million.
the most heavily projects area, they don't get anything. That's crazy.
The most concentrated project area, and arguably one of the worst, right? Like Patterson is
Yeah.
on the news like clockwork because they
They don't
don't
get
have heat.
service.
And so representatives had to be like, hey, my district really needs that. Make sure we're at the top of the list. We didn't have a representative who showed up, so we didn't get any money.
Oh
And that's
man.
who I'm running against, because
Oh my
like
God.
that. And there's countless examples like that, right? Where like it's not just about giving out turkeys on Thanksgiving, backpacks for school, toys for Christmas. It's about what happens when you need to show up in those rooms for community.
And fight. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, exactly.
Right. Like
Yeah,
elbow your way through because people
yeah,
need you to. Because
yeah,
there's people from other communities that have reps that do.
yeah,
And there's NYCHA
yeah,
buildings around the city that never lose heat, by the way, that are cleaned every day, that look great, that
yeah,
anybody's happy to live in. But then in our district, people are forced to live in conditions where there's black mold everywhere, which
yeah,
definitely irritates your asthma, right?
yeah.
Where buildings aren't cleaned, where there's no hot water. Fast forward a year later to almost to the day, Patterson again without heat. This time without water too. People had to come down to the pump to get water. People were filling up buckets, filling up
Oh
bottles.
my
It was
God.
raining.
Oh my God.
And it was just like, where are we? Where are we? How are we in the richest city in the world?
But that is it Hunts Point or is it Mott Haven? Is
It's
the
in Mott Haven. It's
Port
by
District?
Patterson Houses is by 143rd and Morris. That's where
I mean another stat that I've heard maybe from you about it being the lowest economic district in the country.
Yeah, poorest congressional district in the country. Yes, yes,
That's
yes.
crazy.
Right. I think that the like median income for I think we're down to like 21,000 something is like average how much people make every year.
Oh my God. So now Amanda's in the fight. You know, she's back in the fight. She's running again for office. If you're watching this and you're in Mott Haven, definitely, I don't know if it's too late to register to vote. That's another scam.
Yeah.
It's a huge scam. This thing is crazy. Like the layers of ways they put blockages for you to you know, vote is crazy when literally it could be like, oh yes, done.
Well, you know what it is? Because so many people are invested in these systems being fucked up, right? Like so many people are winning at the expense of other people. That I say all the time, like I reject the notion that like some of us have to lose, that there's winners and losers, and like there's a way for everybody to be doing okay,
100%.
and not everybody has to be the biggest winner, but there's a way for us to all be living decently, right? And if for whatever reason you don't buy into that and you think some people have to win and some people have to lose, then I'm here to say, done with the South Bronx losing. We've been doing it for long enough. It's somebody else's turn, you know? Like
it's somebody else's turn.
Somebody else's turn now.
I love it.
And that's just the reality. But there's all these barriers to voting and involvement because people know that
if we get involved, it's going to change.
Because all these things that are obviously common sense, if you get common sense people, it'll be like, wait a minute, why the hell is this working this way? And then it'll change. 100%. Right?
100%. So since it's the entrepreneur hour,
yes,
what is your platform about? Because also Amanda has been the main political force helping Meta Bronx, which I've spoken about Meta Bronx in the past, and Amanda's super technology focused. What would you say to business owners about why should they get involved in politics? Like you talked to me, you know, why should business people and entrepreneurs get involved in politics?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of reasons. I say the first one is probably because the public sector so politics, right? The public sector, the world of like public things, is really shaped by people who often build a career in it, right? So often you find people in politics who haven't really had experience outside of the sector of politics.
Exactly.
For the most part.
They don't know business. They've never done anything business.
Exactly. So it's just like, I've never run a business, right? And like, it's the reason why I call you for so many things, because it's like, listen, I know enough to know that I'm not an expert on everything, and that I need to be able to reach out to people who are experts and say, hey, what do you think about this? Hey, can you give me guidance on this? Right. And that's a real thing. So the ability to have an input in how policy is thought about and shaped, I think is really invaluable, right? Because
100%.
you're living the experiences every day. So even from a practical perspective, like where we are right now with like small business loans and all those kinds of things, right? The way grants get the way grant money gets purposed, and it's like, oh, it can only be used for this and this, but you as a business owner know that like actually what I need the money for is this and this, and when you make it only for that, it's not helpful for me, right? So even being able to be involved and have those conversations and offer that kind of feedback is really critical. And if you're not offering it, somebody else will. And that's the real thing, right? Like there's always somebody working to shape policy, and your voice not being in the room only does a disservice to you and to your community and to your business, whatever your community is, if it's a business community, if it's your home community. If you are not making that perspective heard, then it's just not going to be considered. You can't rely on someone else presenting it, right? Because it's just not realistic. And that, I think, beyond all of the kind of reasons why I think everyone should be involved in their communities, because we all care about each other, we all love each other, we should, right? Like beyond all of those really important reasons, I think from an entrepreneurial perspective, it's like, this is your world, this is your game. The same way you shape everything else as it relates to your business, how could you not shape politics? How could you not work to shape policy that literally decides
helps you? Exactly.
Right? Like everything you can and can't do according to your business is because of politics, right?
And one of the biggest things I learned being involved with you and the Serrano and all that was definitely on the Republican side, they are super involved in politics. Look at our president, right? Like there's a reason.
Anybody to be like Trump or Republican.
No, but there needs to be a balance, right? It's like there's no balance on this side, you know, and it's part of it is I believe that again we're not brought up understanding the benefit of being involved. It's more like you still hear people to this day, oh, politics doesn't help me. Why even vote, right? So you know, as a business person that's figuring out how to just pay their bills and make sure they can pay their workers. That's another thing. And I remember even me when we would get asked, all right, you know, can you come in and give your feedback of what the technology plan of New York City should be? I'm like, for what? You know, and then there'll be people like you like, no, this is your shot to really have a seat at the table, you know, and we literally got a seat at the table because of you, right? And the Bronx was at the table talking about what the Bronx needs. Of course, Brooklyn stole all the ideas and we didn't get anything, but
politics.
I digress.
But I also think that that's for people. I have this conversation. Oh, New York, you hear that? For people, I have that conversation a lot of like, well, politics doesn't do anything for me. Why should I? You know, and it's like if you don't think politics does anything for you, then guarantee that it's doing things against you. 100%. I can name 20 ways that you're pissed off about your life and that there's a policy connected to it instantly. And I have that conversation with people all the time.
So what can people do though? I think this is where I get to ask you, but most people don't. What can people do to change that?
Yeah. I mean, I think voting is a really, really basic one, but it's also more than voting, honestly. You can also, because even for people who are mixed status, right? Like not everyone can vote. Finding people, causes, organizations, elected officials, people running for office, anything that you think is doing good work in the way that you want it to see it happen, or that you want to influence and that you want to be involved in, and amplify that work. Support it in any way that you can. If that means showing up to their events, if that means sharing their stuff on social, if it's a campaign, volunteering to do whatever they need, right? To help. On our campaign, people make phone calls, people write letters to their neighbors, people just agree to get 5 people from their building to vote, right? Like those are the kinds of things that get you involved and get you to know the people who are the players, and then be able to see how things are working and see where are the pressure points that you can make change. And I think that's so half of it is a networking game, right? Because if I had never met you, then I would have never pulled you in and we would never be here, and all of these things that have happened would have never come to be. And that is part of like just being in the same space at the same time. But it's also being open to the fact that, you know, I tell people all the time, like running for office is painful. It is hard. It is like excruciating in ways that I can't like even ever. In ways that I'm still learning and still figuring out how to put into words and how to digest. But I feel like I have a responsibility, right? Like I have this unique intersection of like talent, experience, intellect, whatever, understanding that
network, all that,
responsibility, right? to other people in my community. Entrepreneurs, you have the same responsibility, whether it's to people in your community, whether it's to your family, whether it's to yourself and your business, right? Like you have a responsibility to do what you can. And if you're putting everything on the line anyway for this business, then why wouldn't you want to do everything that you could, right?
I think you hit it on the head with the networking thing, right? As an entrepreneur, you network, right? But if you're not networking with politicians, you're probably missing one of the biggest networking opportunities that will help you and your business. And that's really what I learned when I started getting
and hopefully the community in the process, right? Because again, like I think entrepreneurs feel like this like separate realm, and they are, right? Like they have their own set of experiences, but there's also this very human part of it, right? Like you are also a person who lives in the community and knows what it's like to live somewhere and try to start something. And so you have all of this really incredible experience and feedback that is so valuable to organizations like the Small Business Administration, which is like a federal government administration. We have the Small Business Services on the city level, right? Like there's so many ways that you can give back just by virtue of being who you are, you know? And that is, it's not just this, it is mutually beneficial, right? Like it's not just you networking with politicians to get things for yourself. It's also you networking with politicians and policymakers so that they can hear from your experience and refine how they do their work and do it better so that it's better for everyone.
So, all right, we're coming up almost on the hour. How can people find you, help you? What are you looking for right now?
Okay, so right now, it's a crazy, crazy, crazy coronavirus world, and I hope everyone's doing well. We're kind of figuring out how to still be connecting with people. And
I gave you a suggestion that you use, which was awesome, which is the same system we're using. So are you doing
South Bronx Sundays? South Bronx Sundays, 8 o'clock. We always
South Bronx Sundays. Where can people find that? Where can people find that?
I'm at Amanda Septimo. It's Amanda. I think my name's showing on the screen. Yes, Amanda Septimo. That's my handle on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And we stream live every Sunday at 8 p.m. and we have a new guest, and it's a guest from the community. I think one of the things that I've seen a lot is like people doing these lives of like, here's this doctor, here's this expert, here's this what have you. But I feel like often the voices of regular people get lost in like our policy making, in our conversations. It's like, well, what about regular people? What are they feeling? What are they thinking? Let's hear from them. And so this is me wanting to just have people on and like, tell me what it's like. We hear about housing, we hear about housing policy, but what is it like? What are you struggling with your landlord, with the rent, with this, with that? And what does it feel like? And so right now we're working to just make sure that we're still connecting with people. We have one of the biggest digital divides in the city, which, you know, we
100%, 100%.
like 50,000 people that go home and don't have the internet every day in any way. And that's something that I'm struggling with, right? Because we still want to be reaching those people. I always want.
I have an idea that I had in my head. I haven't told you, but you brought it up right now. What I would do if I were you is I would create a text messaging service where, because like you said, what's the way to connect? Remember we spoke about the app. You were willing to do the app back then, but now text messaging is way easier than an app, right?
There's a bunch of people who there's a few programs called, like there's one called Hustle, there's one called Relay where it's mass texting. But like, not mass texting, like on an individual level.
That I think, because at the end of the day, if I have a question, I get to ask you, but everyone should be able to ask their local. And if you could start that now, I believe that will work.
Yeah, no, and there's a lot of programs like that you can pay into, and we're using that, like text banking. And people, I've got to tell you, because people are so used to, a lot of the presidential campaigns use those, and they're like, hey, I'm Elizabeth, and I'm volunteering with Bernie's campaign. Hey, I'm whatever, and I'm volunteering with whatever. But so many people are so surprised when I'm like, hi, this is Amanda, and I'm running. They're just like, wait, this is really you? And I noticed that people, sometimes texting is great, but sometimes it's hard to like have the nuanced conversation that somebody's trying to have. So sometimes I'll just pick up the phone and call them, because it's like, listen, we're going back and forth. Let me just call you. And people are so surprised when it's me. They're like, whoa, I didn't think it was actually you texting. And it's like, yeah, here I am. Let's talk. I'm a normal person. We're normal people. Let's talk, you know? Are you frozen? Looks like you're frozen, maybe. But I'll keep talking. One of the things that we're looking for right now is getting people to come out, help us phone bank. And you don't have to physically come out, of course. There's all digital ways to do it. And
technical difficulties, my internet. I don't know what's going on.
I was like, listen, I'm gonna keep talking. We so we're looking for people to volunteer with like phone banking, reaching out to people. We have text banks. We're helping people with things that they need during this time, which is not so campaigny, right? It's more just like, listen, we're neighbors. Everybody's going through a hard time,
Yep.
and let's just help people get through this. But it's going to be a hard and fast and crazy ride. I think in that last month, election day,
So
23rd.
so how is that going to work? Because if we can't go outside,
Yeah,
what's going to happen?
that's a really good question. I wish I knew the answer. Right now, there's even confusion about like, is Cuomo going to mail everybody a ballot application? There's some constitutional questions about whether they like. I think there has to be in-person voting.
Oh yeah.
I think it's like a constitutional question. So what that looks like, I think your guess is as good as mine.
To me, technology can so solve this. We've spoken about this for years now. There's the blockchain. You can literally show your face, choose, and it will know it's 1-to-1. It can't be hacked. It's really crazy to me that they just don't want to do it because they're doing it with money right now, right? The Bitcoin and all that is. If they could do it with money, you're gonna tell me you can't do it with a vote? Come on.
Maybe you need to design it. Maybe that's our next thing. Right? Maybe we'll
there's 1,000 of those, right? We have 1,000 of those ready. But yeah, I think it's crazy to me that it's not being done. But politics is, like you said, many people benefiting from the way it is, so it's not going to change.
Yeah.
So how can people right now? So AmandaSeptimo.com.
Yep. And so AmandaSeptimo.com, at Amanda Septimo on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and they're on AmandaSeptimo.com. You can email me at Amanda at AmandaSeptimo.com, but you can Twitter, you can Facebook, you can DM me on Instagram, and I'll see them. I really work hard to be like super a normal person, an accessible normal person, because I think that's what our elected should be. Not these people who are super removed by like 5 layers of other people,
Yes.
And honestly, I'm also like honest with people. When like I can't help with something, I'll tell you. But I do know people and I can kind of point people in the right direction. But generally, I try to be realistic and honest.
Yeah, 100%. And I
politics either.
And you know me, I've passed many people your way, and you've helped many people. But certain times it's like, this is just the way it works.
Yeah, right. And some of these systems are screwed up, and we have to do the hard work to change them.
And that's why.
And honestly, that's the hardest part, I think, for me. That like, I actually told this story recently, and I hadn't told this story often because it like makes me well up, and I like, you just don't want to be crying all the time. So I think I can finally get through it without like getting messed up. But it was 2018. So I grew up in Hunts Point on Menida Street, which is kind of like a hot block between Randall and Spofford. And it's the kind of block where we have like 2 buildings, but then there's a lot of like houses. And it's a kind of street where like people don't really move. Like people live there for like 30, 40, 50 years, raise their kids, right? And so when people move, it's like interesting. And when we get new people, it's like interesting. So this was 2018. I was door knocking in Hunts Point that day. So I was just walking back home. And I'm walking down the block and I see one of my neighbors. In 2018, I was 27. So he was probably like 31. And I see one of my neighbors who I've known for a long time, right? And I see that they're kind of like, it looks like they're moving, maybe. And I was like, oh, I'm nosy. So I was just like, oh, we're moving? And he was just like, oh, we're moving. And I was just like, oh, okay. Like, where are you guys going? And oh no, I was like, why? Because I'm nosy, right? I was like, and I was like, how come? We love it here. It's great. We have block parties. What's going on? And he was like, we actually can't afford the rent anymore.
Wow.
And I was like, I'm sorry. Right. And 2018, I wasn't working at the congressman's office. I wasn't working in a union. I wasn't working anywhere. So it was like, I was just running full time. So it was the first time that I felt pretty like powerless to connect someone to help. right?
Mm.
So I was just like, I'm really sorry. And I was like, where are you moving to? Because Hunts Point is really one of the places in the Bronx.
Yeah.
It has its like pockets of affordability. So it's like, well, if you're leaving Hunts Point because you can't afford it, where are you going, right? And he was like, well, my mom is actually going to go move in with her sister, and I'm going to go move into a shelter.
Wow.
And
Ugh.
I literally, all I could say to him was, I'm sorry. I said, I'm sorry that this is happening to you. And in that moment, it was just like, it felt like everything hit me at once, right? Like, it was like everything that we're fighting for is right here. Because at 31 years old, you shouldn't be making the decision to move into a shelter, right? Like, that's not what life is meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not the options that you're supposed to feel like you have at 31, you know? And it felt like, and I said, I'm sorry this is happening to you, because I think the reality is that we blame people a lot for a lot of things that happen in their lives, right? And say like, well, somewhere along the line,
Yeah. You didn't work hard enough.
exactly.
Yeah.
You're homeless because you made some decision. You struggled with this, you struggled with that. And we transfer all this blame and responsibility onto people. But the reality is that there is system on top of system on top of system, literally layered and designed for you to fail. And so it's not your fault when that happens, right? It's actually these systems working as they're designed. And we see things like failing public schools, right? We see things
Exactly.
like people
Opportunity gap. Yeah.
opportunity gaps, people not being able to find jobs, all of the things, cycles of poverty, all of these things on top of each other, on top of each other. But then suddenly, 18 years old, your responsibility. Everything you did is your responsibility, and it's
And your parents and for your mom, like damn.
Exactly. And it didn't work out for you, and it's your bad. But the reality is that, like, no, I've been failing you since you were a kid, right?
Yeah.
Public school's been failing you since you were a kid. Housing's been failing you since you were a kid. So I cannot just transfer that responsibility to you as an adult. We have a responsibility to right the wrongs. We have a responsibility to make sure that we level playing fields. And the only way we can do that is through policy. And in the meantime, it's not okay to just accept those people as collateral damage, right? That like, oh, people are gonna be displaced and they're gonna die and they're gonna do this until we figure it out. Like, no, that's not okay. And that's why that's why I feel like we have this urgency where it's like people want you to wait until people die in office or until they decide to retire, and it's like, no, why don't you understand that people can't wait? And that like, every time you delay this, you are making somebody's life harder and making them suffer more. That is something that like burns me, you know?
And right now, it's going to be worse, right? This Corona thing is just dropping the economy. And now all these people that were a few levels above that situation are now in that situation too. And now they see, you know, okay, they're just like,
how unfair this all is. Coronavirus is ravaging the Bronx, and it's really sad. But I think one of the things that it's done is draw into focus so many things that we've been talking about for years and years and years. People finally saying like, wow, this is fucked up. Wow, more people in the Bronx are dying. Well, how come? Because kids in the Bronx have asthma, guaranteed. Because if you start working in Mott Haven, I know a teacher who started working in Mott Haven within a couple of years developed asthma. Because that's the reality in these communities. And it's like we're screaming at the top of our lungs, you don't hear us. Here we are in a coronavirus world, and you have no choice but to listen. And I hope that when this is all over, we, instead of going back to the status quo, we imagine what it's like to fix these systems that have been broken so that we don't end up in these situations again, you know?
100%. So it's almost there. We're almost at the hour.
Thank you.
Everybody, thank you for coming. Everybody, please go follow Amanda. Check out the Bronx. What was it called? The South Bronx Sundays.
Yeah, I have to hashtag it. You've just been saying it, but I have to hashtag it. So
okay.
Hashtag it.
What time is the show on Sunday?
It's at 8 p.m. But of course, it gets posted after, and we post it on Instagram. And
you do live. You do live, right?
We do live on Facebook.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll catch all our mistakes.
Yes. I mean, I'm living it too. And good luck. Of course, I'll talk to you before, but good luck in public. You know, and hopefully they come up with a system that allows people to vote fairly, because that's been another huge thing. So thank you, Amanda. Any last words?
Make sure you get them vote. We all have the same responsibility to each other, to communities. Everybody's where they are because somebody else is looking out for them, whether they realize it or not. So let's make sure we do that and pay it forward.
Awesome. Great last word. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.